Last week was a big week for the markets. We saw the S&P 500 up over 2.5%, but I'm not sure that we're going to see the same strength in the markets coming up this week. So what drove the markets last week? Well, first of all, we had the inflation rate come in below expectations. It came in at 4.0%. That's the CPI year-over-year rate. Investors love that. Then we had the producer price index come in at 1.1%, which is lower than expected as well. So we had not only consumer prices lower, we also had producer prices lower. And to top it off, the Federal Reserve paused or skipped. I'm not sure which. There's talk about a skip, maybe it's a pause, a skip pause. But whatever they did, they paused. They stopped raising the rates. Last week was kind of crazy because we saw a record number of calls for the S&P 500 being bought. So why does this matter? It's called the gamma trade. So when the speculators and hedgers come in and buy the calls, the market maker creates the calls, and then as the S&P 500 was rising, the market maker has to come in and buy the underlying equities in order to protect themselves from the risk. This pushes the market higher, and that's what was taking place last week. This is exactly what happened with GameStop. We saw a lot of investors come in and buy a lot of calls on GameStop and forcing the market makers to create the calls and then having to go and buy the underlying equity of GameStop as well, pushing the price up dramatically. So that was definitely a part of what was taking place last week. Last week, we saw the technology sector be the top performing major sector for the S&P 500. Really no surprise. When the S&P 500 moves up substantially, typically investors view the technology sector as the best bang for the buck in the short term and push into the technology sector. However, it can work on the downside or the reverse side. If we do start to see the speculative fervor removed out of the market, we could see the technology sector start to underperform. We really haven't seen that yet, but it's just a warning that if we do start to see that happen. Now, one of the things you'd watch out for is perhaps the volatility index, the VIX, starting to move higher substantially over time. We could start to see the technology sector underperform the S&P 500. Right now, we're out of the strong seasonal period for the technology sector. So just something to be a little bit cautious of. Also, as well, the defensive sectors, they underperformed the S&P 500 for quite some time as everybody's pushing into the growth stocks. Recently, they're starting to show some stability again, which means that investors are a little bit concerned with the market. They're underperforming the overall market right now, but they're starting to show some stability. That could show that investors are slowly starting to move back into a risk-off position here. So another thing to watch out for as well. I think we could see a pause in the markets, pun intended. The reason being is we're past options expiry, quad options expiry last Friday. And on top of that, we have Powell testifying on Capitol Hill this week. And last week, Powell basically said, well, we're pausing for now, okay? But we could raise rates again twice later on this year, indicating by the dot plot. He doesn't usually refer to the dot plot. And I think it's actually not that accurate anyhow, but he referred to it, and he was really emphatic about the case for raising at least once more and perhaps twice as well. So, you know, this week in his testimony on Capitol Hill, we could see Powell come out and reaffirm that position, and which would probably put negative pressure on the markets. We don't have a lot of economic reports coming out this week, and we don't have any really major bellwether companies coming out with their earnings either. So this week, look for the markets to sort of probably digest what they did in the last couple of weeks and perhaps even pause a little bit. We don't see the big drivers coming up this week that can drive the markets higher. I don't think Powell's going to come out and say anything on Capitol Hill that's going to be bullish for the markets overall. If anything, it will be have a hawkish tone to it more than expected. So not expecting much in the markets this week. Thank you for joining me today on my early morning walk on June 20th. Let's get back to the desk before the market opens.